Hello, friends. Welcome back. I am Dr. Surya Ganduri, your host for this weekly internet radio show on developing leadership through self awareness, a series of talks using the knowledge from the principles of quantum physics and wisdom of beliefs. These radio talk shows are a part of the Quantum Leap radio presentations where I invite celebrated mentors from around the world to share with us on how to thrive and empower ourselves in this evolving world. And this special feature is on every third Saturday of the month when you can listen to a unique monthly roundtable live discussion with other experts in business, academia, and life in general. On rest of the Saturdays, you can listen to the weekly regular shows at 8 p.m. Chicago time. Tonight's topic is on decision making and how critical thinking influences our decisions. I'm sure if you have been following me for a while, you would notice that I have dealt with this topic quite a few times before. With the latest spurt in media attention to decision fatigue related issues, I felt it is appropriate for another perspective on how we make decisions in our daily life. In order to thoroughly identify, assess, and select a best choice, alternative from among a variety of potential solutions, it is essential to understand how to utilize the various stages of decision making in a manner that accommodates creative insight and thought. Decision making is most powerful when combined with logical, intuitive, and creative mental processing. The stages used at specific points in the decision making and problem solving processes are well suited to group settings but are equally applicable to individual situations. Tunnel vision is the biggest obstacle to problem identification during the decision making process. Tunnel vision often leads to artificial restrictions on the search for alternatives because it leads to a problem being defined too narrowly. In order to prevent tunnel vision and maintain focus on the main problem, four decision-making stages and their individual steps should be followed in a specific order. Careful execution of these stages will help generate the best solution for an existing problem. The goal of the contribution stage is to gain a better understanding of the existing problem and the specific circumstances surrounding it. Before doing anything, the decision-making group must identify the problem and state it clearly and concisely. The idea at this point is to understand and maintain a focus on the decision-making or problem-solving process and its purpose. The identification of a problem consists of not only describing it accurately, precisely, and in detail, but also addressing the possible gaps that exist between current perceptions of the situation and their desired outcomes. And here are the four typical gaps that indicate a decision has to be made soon. One, something needs to be adjusted or corrected because a current method a procedure, action, or practice is insufficient to produce the desired results. Number two, something needs to be prevented because of a possible threat or negative influence. Number three, something is appealing, engaging, or interesting and needs to be acknowledged, received, or accepted. And number four, something needs to be provided because an element seems to be missing or ignored or unidentified. So, step number one, brainstorming. To initiate effective brainstorming, group members should either individually or collectively write down possible solutions to the problem at hand with all alternatives objectively considered. It's important to brainstorm extensively in order to expand and build upon the ideas generated. Once the brainstorming session has run its course, the group can begin classifying, categorizing, and prioritizing issues surrounding the problem. The goal is to create a hierarchy of issues and factors based on how essential each is to achieving a particular solution. Step number two is criteria. During the second step, the group develops the criteria to evaluate possible alternatives for resolving the problem or situation. It's important to categorize criteria as either essential for a successful solution or simply desired. When the criteria are being developed, the group should establish boundaries, acceptable alternatives, and important values or feelings that need to be considered, as well as certain results that should be avoided. Once ideas are generated, the criteria need to again be objectively considered. Important criteria should be categorized, with the group making a preliminary selection to be used throughout the process. It should be noted that these criteria will probably need to be modified as other important facts and information come to light. Step number three is fact finding. This third step focuses on gathering information and facts that are relevant to making a decision. It's a critical component in clarifying the perceived gaps that I have mentioned earlier. Quality is more important than quantity when gathering information. Too much information can confuse and complicate the decision-making process. Brainstorming can again be used at this point. Facts should be classified and categorized so as to clarify the connection between various elements of information. The goal is to establish patterns and relationships among the facts. All considered information must be analyzed in terms of the group's problem statement and evaluation criteria. Any non-pertinent facts should be eliminated. Relevant information and associated patterns should be prioritized by applicability to the problem at hand and additional facts collected later if necessary. And then the procedural stage. The group must actively develop, evaluate, and select alternatives and solutions to solve the identified problem. Step number one is development. It's important to create alternatives for the entire range of acceptable options that were considered in the earlier contribution stage. At this procedural stage, the process needs to be free open, and unconcerned with feasibility. This activity should ensure that non-standard and creative alternatives are generated. Once again, the brainstorming technique can be used effectively, allowing participants to quickly record and share results without partiality, and to use the input to develop additional alternatives. A number of brainstorming methods, such as challenging assumptions, the random word technique, and taking another perspective, can all be used to generate more creative alternatives. Alternatives that appear unworthy of further consideration need to be eliminated at this stage. It is possible to categorize or classify alternatives and consider them as a group, but care should be taken not to create categories that are too complex, unmanageable, or cumbersome. If the group shows dissatisfaction with the quantity or quality of alternatives under consideration, a break may be beneficial in order to renew the group and inject more objectivity and fresh insight into the process. Step number two is evaluate. A list of specific advantages, disadvantages, and interesting aspects for each alternative should be shared, discussed, and recorded. After eliminating alternatives that are clearly outside the bounds and parameters of the stated criteria, these advantages and disadvantages should be considered in more detail. An analysis of existing relationships among alternatives should also be completed, which can be done by asking, is this an advantage of one, a disadvantage for another? At this point, serious consideration should be given to the relative importance of advantages and disadvantages. Only those alternatives that the majority of the group considers to be relevant and correct should be given further consideration. Step number three is develop a solution. For relatively simple problems, one alternative may clearly be the best choice solution. However, in more complex situations, combining several alternatives may be more effective. A distinct advantage of this process is that if previous steps have been completed thoroughly and with attention to detail, selecting a solution becomes far less complicated. Before completing this stage, it is important to diagnose possible problems with the selected solution and determine the implications of these potential problems. This means asking the question, what could go wrong and why? When developing a solution, it is important to discuss the worst case scenario that could come about if the solution is implemented. Then there is the implementation stage. And during this implementation stage, a plan with which to put the selected solution into action is created. The plan must be highly detailed to allow for successful implementation. Methods of evaluation must also be considered and developed. When developing a plan, the major phases of the implementation are considered first, with steps necessary for each phase outlined. It is often helpful to construct a timeline and diagram the most important steps in the implementation process. Backward planning and task analysis techniques can also be useful during this stage. And the plan should be implemented as carefully and completely as possible, with minor modifications often needed. And then the reflection stage. There are actually three steps in this final decision making stage reflection. Step one is assess implementation. Once initially undertaken, this step should be ongoing. The group needs to decide how to determine completeness of implementation prior to evaluating the implemented solution's effectiveness. The fact that this step is often ignored or omitted is one of the main reasons decision making and problem solving processes fail. It often never becomes apparent that the selected solution is simply not being effectively implemented. Step number two is evaluate the solution's effectiveness. And it's particularly important to evaluate outcomes in light of the problem statement generated at the beginning of the process. Affective, cognitive, and behavioral results should also be considered, especially if they have been identified as important criteria. The solution should be judged according to its overall efficiency and impact on the people involved. Step number three is modifications. When necessary, the solution should be modified according to suggestions generated during the previous step number two, is evaluation often brings additional problems to light that will need to be considered and addressed by the group. Issues identified that focus on implementation efficiency and effectiveness should be targeted. Let me take a short break before talking about how to produce better decision making. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. Producing better decision making. One of the primary reasons organizations and companies go through the effort of developing a qualified team environment is to produce better decision making that results in more positive outcomes. This creates a more effective, efficient, and productive work environment that helps ensure the success of the organization. Good decision making is facilitated by open and effective team communication that allows teams to consider all perspectives and points of view. The synergy of the team allows it to make decisions and outcomes that individuals alone would be unable to reach. Properly done and implemented, effective team decision making makes the job immensely easier for everyone involved. When leaders build an effective team structure and facilitate its activities, they will find that teams are more effective and productive at making decisions than leaders alone would be. This not only makes the leader's job easier, but also enables their organizational unit to be more effective in implementing new decisions. The structure and synergy created in the team environment greatly enhances decision making in all organizational settings. So let's look at what contributes to this enhanced decision making ability. Increased informational flow. The structure and makeup of teams typically allows them to develop more information and data than the average individual is capable of producing. Additionally, because of the number and combination of individuals, teams can analyze information and data more effectively and efficiently than a single individual. These enhanced analytical skills allow teams to base their decisions more on facts and data in order to support their conclusions and recommendations. Balanced perspectives. The structure of the team allows for the input of more feedback and perspectives on any specific issue or topic because all team members are mandated to participate and supply their feedback. The team has the ability to produce a balanced perspective on any issue it reviews. All points of view considered. The brainstorming and consensus building techniques employed by most teams allow them to consider all points of view and perspectives supplied by the team members. Throughout the process, concepts are built upon in order to consolidate ideas and perspectives and use the synergy of the group to create more powerful solutions. This allows the team to assess alternative solutions before reaching a final decision. Solutions can be prioritized. The consensus building and the synergy of the team in the decision making mode allows it to consider, evaluate, and prioritize all possible solutions to any issue or problem. This process is based on criteria established by the team ahead of time, freeing it from any personal bias or agenda. It allows teams to effectively filter all potential solutions in order to arrive at the best possible decision. Positive outcomes. The team process allows people to thoroughly consider all points of view and create balanced solutions that ultimately produce positive outcomes for the organization. It should be noted that initial decision making in new team environments can be awkward and time consuming. As teams become more experienced and mature in making decisions, the entire process will become more streamlined, automatic, and efficient. Leaders should avoid the temptation of minimizing the team's ability to grow, especially during the early stages of team development. Doing so will hinder its potential for growth, effectiveness, and productivity. To measure the success or failure of our decision making, we need to establish clear and unambiguous outcomes. In science, this approach has been developed over many years. It is well known that most experiments can be interpreted in different ways, and so before embarking on an experiment, the outcomes should be defined explicitly. When making decisions, it is just as important to define what will and what will not happen because of the decision being made. If this is not set out clearly, then there is a danger that the decision will be seen as a success or failure by those who rewrite the history, and even more of a danger that you will begin to believe that you made the correct decision and apply the same decision in similar circumstances in the future. Precise outcomes should be considered for all decisions. This is not true for idea generation, however. At the idea generation stage, you need to be able to explore possibilities and generate ideas from these, as it is highly restrictive for idea generation to apply concrete outcomes. So we need to develop distinctly different strategies for exploring ideas and making decisions on ideas. And when making a decision, we should be able to predict the consequences of this decision accurately and in as much detail as possible. In that way, we will be able to judge the success or failure of our decision in an objective manner and so improve our decision making in the future. Now, let's talk about intuition in the decision making process. Let's look at Malcolm Gladwell's concept of thin slicing. I would interpret this like you are, in fact, cognitively perceiving data. It's just that you are doing it so quickly. With pattern recognition from past experience, what you experience as intuitive is actually just unbelievably quick cognitive processing. There are also arguments that when the emotional part of the brain is damaged, people cannot make decisions. You need the right and left hand side of the brain, the cognitive and the emotional. I think that is right for certain kinds of decisions, such as when you are gathering information and trying to make meaning or make sense out of information. But these approaches to decision making don't address what might be called direct knowing. I know this, but I don't know how I know it. I did not read it in a book. Nobody told it to me. I didn't have an Excel spreadsheet that laid it out for me. Nonetheless, I know it. I think we have a set of skills that coaches and leaders who work with teams might call reading the room. Others call it attunement or discernment. It's not data processing and thin slicing, and it's also not having an emotional evaluation of decisions. It's a sensing. When I work with a team in crisis, tuning in to the group's feelings and emotions really helps me ask the right questions about what's happening. People will be shocked when they think back over the course of their lives. When I made the decision, I actually knew it was wrong, but I didn't trust the part of me that was telling me not to do it. Or they say, it was the craziest thing. I made this decision. Everyone in my life thought I was insane, but I just knew it was right. And it turned out it was the best decision I ever made. That leads us to the 6 phases of critical thinking. Critical thinking can be defined as learning to think better by improving one's thinking skills. Individuals who are critical thinkers use the thinking process to analyze, consider, and reflect, and synthesize, piece together what they have learned or are currently learning. Unfortunately, much of everyone's thinking tends to be biased, imprecise, unclear, uninformed, prejudiced. Since this becomes severely limiting, critical thinking is needed to improve its quality and value. Within the organizational setting, clear thinking is necessary for many things like overcoming problems, making changes, modifications, or adaptations within work structures, methods and problem solving situations, resolving situational conflict and pressing issues, and inventing and implementing new ideas, techniques, and solutions. Critical thinking development is a gradual process. It requires mastering plateaus of learning as well as maintaining a serious focus on the process itself, changing personal habits of thought, which tends to be a long range project and extensive development time. Within the process of critical thinking, it is important to recognize what does not comprise its basic elements or components. Critical thinking is not accomplished by saying something without carefully thinking it through or taking a guess at what one thinks should be done, memorizing material to analyze, discuss, or examine, doing something just because it has always been done, believing something because it is what everyone else tends to believe, or arguing about something when there are no facts to back up the argument. And there are certain qualities critical thinkers possess, and these characteristics tend to characterize individuals as deep thinkers, which separates them from more typical basic thinkers. Critical thinkers tend to be self disciplined, self directed, self monitored, and self corrective thinkers. They raise essential or crucial questions and problems and then proceed to formulate them clearly and precisely. Critical thinkers gather, assemble, evaluate, and appraise relevant information. They come to well reasoned deductions, conclusions, and solutions while measuring and testing them against relevant standards and criteria. They also keep an open mind within alternative systems of thought while continually recognizing and assessing their assumptions and lines of reasoning. Finally, critical thinkers communicate effectively with others in seeking out and determining solutions for challenges and problems. There tends to be six developmental thinking phases that lead to mastering the art of critical thinking. Through extensive practice and applications of the process, individuals can expect to begin altering and eventually changing their individual habits of thought. I'm going to describe each of these progressive phases now. Phase one is the unenlightened thinker. Individuals generally are not consciously aware that significant problems do exist within their current patterns of thinking. In phase two, the confronted thinker is or the individuals are aware that existing problems are evident or apparent within their process of thinking. Phase three, the novice thinker. Individuals try to initiate improvements within their thinking, but without relying on regular or consistent practice. Stage four, you become a proactive thinker. This is where the individuals do recognize the importance of regular practice to improve and enhance their thinking. Phase five, you become the developed thinker. Individuals begin to advance in accordance with the amount of practice that is awarded to the process. And finally, the phase number six is where you become the master thinker. Individuals become skilled and insightful, where reflective and analytical and evaluative thinking becomes second nature. Individuals can only develop through these phases if they accept the fact that there are serious problems with their current processes and methods of thinking, and are able to accept the challenge that their thinking presents to them and make it a point to begin regular practice to improve and enhance the components and elements of critical thinking. Let me take a short break and then we'll talk about how to develop critical thinking. I will be right back. All right, I'm back. So, let me talk about the critical thinking, how it relies upon the clarity of purpose. In order to develop critical thinking, it is important for individuals to be clear as to the purpose of the task or topic at hand and the main question that is at issue in regard to it. To accomplish this goal, it is essential to strive to be clear, accurate, precise, and relevant, practice thinking beneath the surface, be logical and fair minded, apply critical thinking skills to all reading, writing, speaking, and listening activities, and apply these skills to all aspects of work as well as life in general. Questioning the impetus for critical thinking. Dead questions reflect dead minds. Unfortunately, most individuals, even managers, leaders, and trainers, tend not to ask many thought stimulating types of questions. They tend to stick to dead questions like, is this going to be what is expected from now on? Or how are we supposed to understand or do this? And other questions that outwardly imply the desire not to think. Some people are not natural generators of in depth questions and answers of their own making, which helps in establishing non critical thinking environments. These individuals are not seriously engaged in thinking through or rethinking through their own initiatives, issues, concerns, topics, or instructional concepts and resort to being mere purveyors of the questions and answers of others. They often end up initiating or responding to some initial concerns or issues that tend to surface spontaneously during a discussion or meeting without having personal background information that would otherwise help stimulate deeper levels of creative probing and evaluative questioning. Sometimes they tend to apply secondhand information, knowledge, or questions that have been passed down, which limits creative assessments and deeper level questioning. Often they find themselves referencing authors or others who are considered to be experts or leaders in their field rather than questioning important workplace related issues, ideas, methods, or concerns that need to be probed in depth. But questioning through critical thinking keeps the organization alive. Every company stays alive only to the extent that fresh questions are generated and taken seriously. These questions are then used as the driving force for generating and implementing changes. To think through or rethink anything, individuals within an organization must ask questions that stimulate deeper levels of thought. Questions define tasks, express problems, and identify issues, while answers, on the other hand, often signal a full stop in thought. Only when answers generate further questions does thought continue to add value in terms of personal as well as organizational growth and change. So it is important to remember that individuals within an organization who generate and ask serious and insightful questions are the ones who are, in fact, truly thinking, developing, and learning. It is possible to move an organization forward by just asking employees to list all of the questions that they have about an issue, method, or topic, including all questions generated by their first list of questions. However, deep questions drive out thoughts that rest underneath the surface of things and force individuals to deal with complexity, while questions of purpose force individuals to define their task. Questions of information force individuals to look at their sources of information as well as its quality. So, what are the components of critical thinking? Critical thinking is a powerful process if understood and applied effectively. When developing critical thinking skills, it is important to understand more about the activity and process that comprises it. Once understood, fears about actively applying critical thinking skills will likely dissipate. Critical thinking is able to translate the thinking process into clear, persuasive, truthful language which is carefully and logically crafted. At the same time, it is able to convert perceptions and reactions into concepts, ideas, assumptions, suppositions, inferences, hypotheses, questions, beliefs, premises, and logical arguments. There are many misconceptions about critical thinking that tend to hinder individuals from continually working to develop it. Unfortunately, many people assume the process is too difficult and remain unenlightened as to how the process can help them not only in their work environments but in their own personal lives as well. And there are often four roadblocks that create negative feelings about getting more involved in the critical thinking process. Number one, it is more of a negative process since it tends to tear down the ideas and inserts nothing in their place. In actuality, it is a positive process that is able to put things in a more realistic perspective. Two, it will lead to the inability to make commitments to people or ideas. In actuality, commitments become informed ones. The third roadblock, it seems to involve dramatic change since one is expected to continually abandon old assumptions. In actuality, some beliefs stay the same. Individuals simply become more informed. And the fourth roadblock, it is detached, unemotional, and cold. In actuality, it is highly poignant and liberating since individuals tend to be free of their past assumptions and the anxiety of self scrutiny. Critical thinking actually encompasses specific elements. Every process or method is made of essential components, and critical thinking is no different. These components provide a structure to the process, which, if incorporated, makes persuasive, truthful, and supportive verbal communication possible to highly influence others' points of view and message acceptance. So let's look at some of the major components in critical thinking, like perception, assumptions, emotions, language, argument, fallacy, logic, and problem solving. So let's look at each one individually. Assumptions. Assumptions are central to critical thinking. They tend to be implied, where individuals are not always conscious of them. Assumptions are not always bad and often rest on the notion that some ideas are obvious. They tend to make individuals comfortable with their present beliefs, shutting out any alternatives. Perceptions. Perception is considered to be the manner in which individuals receive, interpret, and translate experiences. How individuals perceive things works to define how they think. Perception tends to provide individuals a significant filtering system. Emotions. Trying to leave emotion out of almost anything is impossible, as it is part of everything people do and think. Emotions are the number one cause of creating and putting into place thinking and operating barriers, which are continually used as a defense mechanism. Critical thinkers do not ignore or deny emotions, but learn to accept and manage them. Language. Thinking cannot be separated from language since both tend to have three primary purposes: to inform, to persuade, and to explain. Language denotes or designates meanings and connotes, implies, or suggests something, and relies heavily on the use of metaphors. Metaphors are powerful language tools which are able to influence how individuals think and problem solve. These figures of speech give great color and depth to one's language. Metaphors can be short phrases, stories, or even poetic renditions, and is a verbal message that listeners can easily interpret and visualize. Argument. An argument is a claim which is used to persuade that something is or is not true, or should not be done. An argument contains three basic elements: an issue, one or more reasons or premises, and one or more conclusions. An argument can be either valid or invalid based on its structure, and only premises and conclusions are reached which are either true or false. The goal of critical thinking is to implement a sound argument which has both a valid or proper structure and contains true premises. This is where using logic makes all the difference. Fallacy. Reasoning does not meet the criteria for being a sound argument is considered erroneous or fallacious. A fallacy comes from incorrect patterns of reasoning. However, it does not always mean that the conclusion is false, but it does underscore the fact that the reasoning used to support it is not valid, based on true premises, or complete, and does not include all necessary relevant information. Logic. Logic incorporates two methods or types of reasoning: deductive and inductive. Deductive reasoning relies on facts, certainty, validity, truth of premises, sound arguments, and supported conclusions. Inductive reasoning relies on diverse facts, probability, generalizations, hypotheses, analogies, and inductive strength. So let's look at the problem solving through logic, because a logic problem is like any problem. It requires six things. One, understanding the problem. In other words, listen, read, and take heed. Two, identifying all of the unknowns as well as the knowns. Three, interpreting relationships between them. Visual aids can help in this regard. And four, generating a strategy from steps two and three that I just discussed. Number five, applying the strategy and solving the problem. And number six is repeat the process if it is necessary. Well, I think I will stop with that for now. Let me know if I can be of any service or help in any areas that I discussed tonight. I wish you good luck and great inspiration in your journey. I also hope that whether you listened to this live on air broadcast or the recorded audio from the archives, have heard something that resonated well with you, or even know somebody in your life who could benefit from this discussion. If so, I would encourage you to share this discussion with them and ask them to get in touch with me if I could be of further assistance to them. I hope you heard something useful while listening to this radio talk as much as I have enjoyed presenting it tonight. Please tune in every Saturday at 8 p.m. Chicago time as I discuss other topics in this internet radio talk show. Also, remember that Quantum Leap Radio broadcasts on a variety of topics every week and also in a roundtable format each month by coaches and mentors who are highly recommended as the cream of the crop and best of the best out there that have been recognized and established in the business world and life in general. Namaste.